There's a level of force that I've covered the news for 20 years. I have never seen this so consistently, this level of force used against civilians, whether they're documented or undocumented. It makes no sense to me. Why, in your view, is this being tolerated, and who's responsible for stopping it? Hi, Senator. I have not had a chance to speak to you since I was at News Not Noise. I am so grateful for your time today. Thank you.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
So, for anybody who, for whatever reason, doesn't know this, in addition to being Michigan's newest senator and spending years in the House, you have deep experience in intelligence and defense. You did 3 tours in Iraq. You had senior defense roles at the Pentagon and the White House. So, with that as background, I would love to ask you to reflect on what we're seeing happen in Chicago right now with these National Guard troops from Texas fanning out across the city against the will of the governor and mayor. Senator Durbin has called it almost criminal. We're also seeing ICE agents dressed in what appears to me to be combat gear facing down civilians. As somebody who has worked in the defense sector, what does it mean to you when you see U.S. military face off against civilians on U.S. soil?
Yeah, look, every single day there's crazy things that happen, but this issue and the potential use of the uniformed military against the people of the United States is, to me, fits into just a very different category than a lot of the still troublesome but kind of temporary things that we see going on across the country. I grew up working alongside the military my entire career. It's just a part of who I am to work alongside the military. And the idea that American people could be scared of their own military, to me, is one of those strategic and irreversible things that I think we all should be deeply worried about. Now, it's also, sort of well known that it's part of like an authoritarian playbook. I mean, this is not, we've seen this in lots of other countries and lots of other contexts. I've served abroad in many places that are not democracies. And this idea of going into a place, creating a pretext so that you can bring in even more force, first in law enforcement, then with the military. Suddenly you're declaring martial law. I mean, suddenly you're suspending some of our most important beliefs, like posse comitatus, habeas corpus, and you're in a place where there's a real risk of, escalating violence, and people fearing their military. So it is what we're watching, I think, should concern every American, whether you are a supporter of President Trump or the Democrats.
You've called for oversight to make sure that the force stays lawful and constitutional. How concerned are you that the soldiers could end up using lethal force against Americans?
Well, yeah, this is the sort of cycle of violence that we're concerned about, right? We've already started to see some of the videos come out from places like Chicago of what's happening with ICE agents.
Mhm.
We know that the administration is looking for, kind of reasons, I think, to be even more engaged. And so you have something that goes wrong, something that becomes violent. Suddenly the administration is saying, let's send more force and more force and more force. And I think the thing that people miss sometimes is that our uniformed military are literally, as an article of faith, trained to be protecting from, violence abroad. They're not trained in law enforcement. They are not trained in arrest or detention or, in raids in a context of a city. That's what law enforcement is trained for. So mistakes can happen. And suddenly you get a nervous guardsman or a nervous, active duty soldier who's been sent to one of these places. The crowd starts surrounding them. They get nervous. Bad things happen, right?
Mhm.
And that's my concern. Not that any one person on the street is looking to do that, to open fire on someone, but that you can easily have a spiral of violence that gets out of control before you know what's happening.
You've warned in the past, and you've mentioned it a few times in the few minutes we've spoken about the possibility that the military could turn into sort of a domestic police force that the people are afraid of. What is the long-term damage if that happens?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, the best example I have is from my own state, right? In Detroit in 1967, we had very bad riots. And eventually, with the governor's request, the National Guard came into the city and frankly made it worse. And we had 50 dead. I mean, a real sort of trauma from my home state. So fast forward, I wasn't even born then, right? It wasn't my era. Fast forward to COVID, and I am talking to the National Guard about setting up a 1,000-bed facility in downtown Detroit. And I'm just casually talking to some of the leaders in Detroit, and I said, "Look, we need the Guard to help us set this up." And they said, "No, we are still traumatized from 1967 to year 2000 on what the Guard did, and we have a lot of lack of trust." And this was so unbelievable to me as someone who had served alongside and am so proud of what the military does every day. So that's the kind of long-term threat, is that people again are suspicious of people in uniform, which it just breaks my heart, and it's dangerous.
You talk about dangerous. I want to switch just a bit to focus on ICE. We saw, I don't know if you've seen this, there's video of a pastor in Chicago who was unarmed, peacefully protesting, hit in the head by a pepper ball fired by an ICE agent from a rooftop. It's just one example. We've seen federal forces in Chicago mace a protester for yelling at them in the face. There's a level of force that I've covered the news for 20 years. I have never seen this so consistently. This level of force used against civilians, whether they're documented or undocumented, it makes no sense to me. Why, in your view, is this being tolerated, and who's responsible for stopping it?
Yeah, it's really not complicated. Leadership climate is set at the top in any chain of command organization, military, law enforcement. If the big boss, the big commander in chief, is talking about protesters and using words like terrorism, right? Domestic terrorism, it gives this sort of unspoken permission for the folks on the ground to treat people differently, to use force differently, and to go outside norms and standards of dealing with our right to peacefully protest. So I think that's a leadership climate thing. And then, I think I've talked about this. The president sort of very quietly put out this executive order on domestic terrorism in September and said the quiet part out loud: we're going to be making a list of domestic terrorist organizations. And the criteria was incredibly broad. If you don't support Christian values or a traditional view of the family. I mean, it didn't say anything just about violence, which we all understand. You use violence, you should be treated accordingly, right? But I think when you start labeling groups you don't like as terrorist organizations, or even insinuating that, then it gives permission for law enforcement and down the road for the military to see those people differently than the American citizens that frankly are their brothers and sisters. So leadership climate is set at the top, and the accountability goes with the Secretary of Homeland Security and then the president.
And the president has said at times, do what you have to do. It's like that kind of language. Let me push further down on one of the points you just made. The president has compared Antifa. He's designated Antifa in particular as a terrorist organization, a domestic terrorist organization, which is not actually a legal definition that exists right now.
Right.
And he has compared it, or I think Secretary Noem compared Antifa to Hamas or foreign terrorist organizations. As somebody who has actually worked in this space, how accurate is this comparison?
Well, I think that we just need to ask, show me the number of Antifa arrests you've made in the past 2 years, or if you want to go back to the Trump administration, right? Just the organization that they're talking about. To be honest, we've been briefed over and over in the Homeland Committee when I was in the House and in the Senate. The FBI will come up and tell you that they just don't think that they're like a real group, right? And when you say, okay, how many folks from this named group have you arrested or investigated or whatever? They're like, it's like, I think it was at least in the House, it was a very, very small number. So to compare that to Hamas, which had a full military apparatus, it wasn't just a terrorist group, it had built an army, right? I think it is not an apt comparison. Now, again, you use violence against American citizens here, against law enforcement, you should be treated accordingly. No one gets to use violence. That includes protesters who feel very passionately about their cause. But if you're organizing, and you're peacefully protesting at the gate of some facility, that is not terrorism.
Thank you. I feel like you're the expert, so it's good to hear that from you. I want to switch a bit to different hat you wear. The House just passed a bill that will speed up defense contracts. Rather than taking years to approve defense contracts, it would be down to 90 days. And this measure is now in the Senate. Of course, everything's shut down, but it will be an issue that will be before the Senate. And I'm just curious, as somebody who works on these issues, do you think this is a smart way to modernize defense spending? Or could it actually weaken oversight, especially as big Trump donors are moving into the contracting business?
Yeah, I mean, look, we all know that there's sweetheart deals that are going on, but I have to say, for a long time, including like when I worked at the Pentagon, the process is just too slow of getting new technology into the Defense Department. And you don't have to take my word for it. Like, the Chinese are eating our lunch on this right now. If you want to go from like concept to actually fielding a new piece of technology in the Defense Department, from idea to actually using it in a soldier's hands, it's 12 years.
It's
Okay.
crazy.
And in China, it's 5. So all you have to do is look at the state of technology and the rate of adoption of technology, and you can see that they're eating our lunch. And I got a problem with that. I have no doubt that we're going to invent the cool new thing, right, in the United States. But if we can't adopt it for 12 years, then we're not really putting all our best feet forward there. So I do believe in speeding it up. I do believe that some of that means getting rid of some of the regulation that Congress over the years has put on. There's a lot of redundancy in the system. You don't want to take away oversight ever, especially under this administration. But do I believe for national security reasons, we got to speed that machine up? Hell yes.
Okay. I would love to push you on that. I hear that you have to go vote. I want to ask you really quickly, are you starting to see any Republicans break with their party on shutdown issues and indicate they want to back the subsidies?
There's definitely constant conversations going on, even on the floor of the Senate. I mean, openly, in front of the cameras. But I think what's interesting is watching what the administration is leaking and what the Republicans are leaking into the press. Trial balloons on having a vote on ACA subsidies. I mean, things that are on healthcare. And that's all that's the only thing we've been asking for is let's have a real conversation like adults. And we want to talk about healthcare. And we're big boys and girls. We're not going to get everything that we want. But that, to me, like, what I watch what's happening with the selective leaking in the press.
Yeah.
And that means they understand that they got to come together and sit with us. And it has to start on healthcare. And that is a good news story.
Okay. Well, we're ready for good news. So go do what you need to do and hopefully bring us some good news soon. And please come back. It's just a pleasure to talk to you.
Appreciate that. Sorry to have to run and vote. Take care now.
I understand. Do your job. Bye.
Bye now.